Hi class, this short video is going to cover the last part of chapter 7 material. So we've been talking about families and we're going to continue to talk a little bit about families. So with birth order, we know that parents who are having a kid for the first time often seem a lot more stressed about childbirth and about raising a kid. They're often more worried about what it is they're going to do. In all of the different domains of parenting. And so our experienced parents are often a little bit more relaxed. So after your first kid, most people kind of relax a little bit. They know what they need to get, what they don't need to get, and kind of feel a little bit more secure in their parenting. So Love's actually made commercials for this. They're the diaper company. Love's made commercials kind of playing off this first time parenting versus experienced parenting. So that one's linked underneath. Birth order research is really difficult because families come in so many different shapes and sizes, but we do think that in a traditional kind of sibling hierarchy, the first one born is really high achieving, and the later born children are not as inundated with adults. They live in a world that's populated by children for the most part, more so than the firstborn, who's just kind of got the parents and them. So later born kids are often more popular and creative, and they explore their boundaries more, and they're less concerned with what adults think about them. Divorce and remarriage. So divorce, this often can have a risk for negative outcomes. So kids can worry it was their fault. They can have stress by the parents fighting all the time. But what we think might be at work here too is the conflict before the divorce. So it's not good to live in a conflictual environment, especially that constant conflict. And so that may be the real root of the problem. And so in that case, the parents separating may actually be the best thing to reduce the conflict. So that can be a good thing for kids. A lot of kids' outcomes are going to depend on how well the parents interact with each other. So it depends on their level of cooperation with one another. People who manage to live in a joint custody situation, so they have both parents in their lives, they're able to interact with both parents easily. These kind of kids, the kids who have that experience, seem to do a lot better. This picture is of Hilary Duff and her ex-husband. They vacation together and are very, very big into their joint custody. So parents who can cooperate make it a lot easier. Blended families, most of our families are going to remarry. This can have some negative effects. So adolescents especially can feel like the new parent is maybe stepping on their family's toes. They've already been adjusted to living a certain lifestyle, and here comes this new adult. So this can slightly increase divorce rates, not only due to the stress of the children in the environment, but also because people have already divorced at that point, and they know that they don't have to take certain things in a marriage. They know what they will and won't stand for. And so if situations are not working out, they're more likely to get a divorce. For children, the best outcome is obviously going to be when both adults are caring. So if you've got two, good, caring adults, that's going to be the best. This will move us into a different topic where we're going to spend a few minutes, which is child maltreatment. So there's different types of child maltreatment. If you try to think of the different ways in which children can be treated poorly. Neglect is a big one. So I would encourage you to watch this video. It talks about neglect, what neglect is, and different categories of neglect. So many of us will have to not pay attention to our kids for a certain amount of time. Could be a few minutes because we're answering an email or taking a shower. That type of neglect is not really detrimental to kids. It's good for them to have a little bit of time to learn how to self-soothe and to not be immediately cared for every second of the day. Helps them learn some self-sufficiency. But when we get into issues is when neglect is chronic. So kids are constantly not receiving enough adult care. They can also receive not enough food, clothing, or even medical care. So that video kind of outlines that and what we see more with these youth. And then abuse. These are our other types of child maltreatment. So physical, sexual, and psychological abuse. Your book says that neglect is by far the most common type of child maltreatment, and that psychological abuse is the least common. But psychological abuse is interesting because many people don't report it. And so I don't think we really have a good understanding of the rates of psychological abuse. So who abuses? If we actually look at parents and say who is going to abuse their children, obviously we can't predict this 100%, but we know that cultural values have something to do with it. So when people really accept physical punishment, high acceptance of that, then it can lead to more physical punishment or more physical abuse. So you can imagine a scenario maybe where someone is physically punishing their child, but they go overboard and leave marks and break a bone or something, and it's physical abuse. Social conditions also play a big role. So when people live in poverty, when they have a lot of stress or they're isolated socially, we see this as kind of a back against the wall parenting, which this picture shows here. So it's so many factors that are kind of putting you back up against a wall. And you can imagine if you were back in that situation, your back's against the wall, you try to fight to get out of it. You're just irritable, stressed, you don't have anybody to rely on. Social isolation is huge. So you can't have someone to just be like, man, take these kids for an hour so I can take a bath. Parents without that ability to kind of step away can really struggle. So just on the topic of who abuses, when we see a lot of general family dysfunction, that's a risk factor. When parents were abused themselves is a risk factor, but a lot of parents can break the cycle, or probably every parent can break the cycle if they make that choice. So it can be going through therapy to learn how to better react to kids, just making an active choice, you're not going to do it. Lots of different ways you can break the cycle. Some parents will have unrealistic expectations about what their kids are capable of doing. So I had a conversation with somebody once. He just struck up the conversation while I was in line waiting to check out at a Dollar General, and he said that his 2-year-old tried to pour himself a bowl of cereal while he was upstairs asleep. The father was upstairs asleep. So it sounded like the 2-year-old was taking initiative, trying to get himself some cereal, and he spilled milk everywhere. And the father told me that he beat his son for that. And that's a really unrealistic expectation to think that a 2-year-old is going to be able to neatly and very carefully pour from a giant gallon of milk into a tiny bowl of cereal without any type of spilling. So the child was just showing initiative, and the father got very, very upset with him for that. So that's a really unrealistic expectation for what a 2-year-old is capable of. These kids who are victims of abuse are often younger, so they're more challenging in many ways. They're not as self-sufficient. They rely more on the parent. They're frequently ill, which can lead to that stress for the parents. And often they're stepchildren. The effects of abuse are really, really important. The biggest thing is they are lifelong, and they can be intergenerational. So we can see people who've been abused themselves later abuse their own children. So these effects can be intergenerational. But they include things like social troubles and a lot of mental and physical illness. Some of our best work on this has been through a study that's run by the CDC, Center for Disease Control and Prevention, which is the ACE study. So this is the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. So what they do in the ACE study is they ask people to identify whether they've experienced these forms of abuse, neglect, or a general household dysfunction. So people will say yes or no, I've experienced this or not, and they count up the number of things that one has experienced, and that gives an ACE score. So if you've experienced physical abuse, emotional neglect, and an incarcerated relative, your ACE score would be 3. And the highest ACE score is a 10 if you've experienced all of these. So what they found by asking adults to kind of reflect back and determine or to say what it is that they've experienced and then calculated this ACE score, they found that people with higher ACE scores, often it's above a threshold of about 4, really seem to have a lot more behaviors and physical and mental health issues. So these behaviors include being sedentary, drug use, smoking, missing work, all kinds of stuff. And then the physical and mental health problems are even things like cancer, heart disease, and then things like depression and suicide attempts. So people who've experienced more abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction are much more likely to experience these types of maladaptive behaviors and physical and mental health problems. We also see that the ACE score is kind of a dose response thing. So if you've experienced 1 ACE, then you're at less risk for someone who's experienced 2, and someone who's experienced 2 is at less risk than someone who's experienced 3, and so on and so forth. So it seems like it's a cumulative effect of experiencing this abuse. There are some protective factors though, so this is not, be all end all. There are some things that really help kids. One is just their level of resilience. So if kids can, kind of say, I'm going to get through this, I've gotten through worse in the past, I'm going to make it through. So they respond really adaptively, they're resourceful. A big one though is SSNRs, which sounds like something really complicated, but all it is having an adult who will love you, who will be there with you and help you to avoid some of the worst effects of the abuse and neglect. So if you've got a kid that you see in your neighborhood and you know that they're probably experiencing some maltreatment, alert the proper authorities, but then you can just be an SSNR, just be nice to them, try and help. These really have a really big effect on kids. So to prevent abuse, obviously that would be the ideal, right? No abuse happening. With that, we have education and counseling that really seem helpful. So social change is another big one. So on the personal level, we think education and counseling is really helpful. But to really make a difference in the rates of abuse, we really need some social change. So decreasing some of the factors that make it likely parents will abuse and increasing those supports for parents. So that'll move us into groups and peers. So with groups, we're talking about groups in middle childhood, adolescence. With our groups, we have to have certain factors. They should be voluntary. So these groups that kids form, they're not something that's formed by their parents and kind of forced onto them. They're voluntary. Kids want to be a part of that group. They like each other, and there's intimacy in that group. So they share secrets, they share their emotions, and they really form kind of a tight-knit group. There's a difference, though, between our cliques and our crowds. If you're in a clique, it's a kind of smaller group, so it might be 3, 4 people. If you've seen the movie Mean Girls, that's a clique. It's just 4 girls in that group. A crowd is a larger group, so this is often mixed sex, and they vary in prestige, and these are the ones that we are able to reflect back on high school and recognize that some of these crowds existed. So things like theater kids or band kids or goth kids or jocks or cheerleaders are some of the often used terms for these crowds. So they're much bigger. Cliques are small, crowds are big. There's a lot of consequences of having a friend group. So some of these consequences are wonderful. They're benefits. So you have increased self-esteem when you're part of a group. You can respond better to challenge and stress. And sometimes your peers will pressure you in a good way. So you can have that peer who's like, hey, I got a job at the mall. Come and get a job with me and earn some money. Or I'm volunteering this week, so I want you to volunteer too. So it can have good effects, peer pressure. But it can also have negative effects. So it can reinforce those risky behaviors. If your friends are, instead of going to the mall and working, they're doing drugs and they encourage you to do them too. That's the negative peer pressure. But we also see co-rumination, especially in groups of girls. And so ruminating, when you ruminate, so we'll take the root of the word. When you ruminate, you have something in your mind that you think about over and over and over and over and over. So you might think of a negative text you got, and you'll just keep thinking about it. And so sometimes friends will co-ruminate. So they'll share what they're ruminating about, and then they'll just ruminate on it as a group. And there's no real outcome to that. There's no positive change. They don't say, well, I know you've had a rough day, but let's go bowling. They just think about it over and over and over and just ruminate as a group. So that can be pretty negative. Popularity and rejection is a really interesting thing. These sociometric ratings, I think they're fascinating because it's really hard to infiltrate a group of school children when you're not in that group and to understand who they like, who they don't like. This is not an easy thing to do. And so what we end up seeing is that researchers have found a great way to go do it. So they'll ask kids in a room to just list 2 of their peers that they like and 2 that they don't like. And they'll ask every single kid in the room to do that. They'll collect those sociometric ratings, and they're able to get a lot from that. So popular kids are those that everyone kind of says they like. So they fall on many of people's lists. They say, yeah, I just like this person. That's popular. Rejected kids, this is an active rejection. So this will be the kid that people say they do not like. So I don't like this person. And that is one of the most, the groups that's in most danger, when people just don't like that child for a certain reason. They often can become aggressive or withdrawn, or maybe the aggressiveness was evident before. Maybe that's why the kids don't like them, is that they're pretty aggressive. So it can be an issue. We have to worry about our rejected kids. Controversial kids, they get ratings of both, so some kids like them, some kids don't. Average kids, they often have one or two people that say that they like them. They like those one or two people as well. So it's just the kid that has, a couple friends, those mutual friends, but that's it. So they're not really well liked on the whole or hated on the whole. Neglected kids are those that don't show up in the ratings. So nobody really says they like them. Nobody really says they don't like them. They're just kind of ignored. Bullying, obviously we know bullying can have negative effects, so I don't think that's going to be a surprise to anyone. Instrumental bullying, this is more like instrumental aggression. It's not bullying, it's aggression. So children will show instrumental aggression when they're trying to get something that they want. So if you play a sport and you might, knock somebody out of the way when you're playing the sport, but then as soon as you're done, you're like, hey, bud, you were only knocking them out of the way just to achieve your goal. It wasn't because you're trying to be mean. Hostile aggression is when you are trying to be mean. So this is that active, like, I want to see you cry kind of approach. And relational aggression is what we often think of as maybe that mean girls, though boys can engage in relational aggression as well. But it's kind of talking about one another, gossiping, keeping secrets, trying to ruin someone's reputation. That's relational aggression. That'll move us into our very last topic, which is technology. So the book kind of glosses over a lot of what technology will do. I think this could be a whole course in and of itself, is the effect of technology on kids, and I really look forward to reading the research in this as we go about the years. But this comment kind of sums up some of the work on technology, which is that we're doing the same stuff. We're asking our kids, how was school today, but we're doing it in a different way. So now she's saying, read it on my blog, Dad. So we think it's this digital childhood is the words that the book uses, but it's changing how kids do stuff, not what they do, according to your textbook. So they think that kids are still doing the same stuff, they're just doing it in a different way. The important factors for technology are going to be what the kid's using, so the content. If you're spending hours on the History Channel website, then that's going to be maybe educational compared to spending hours on, a more dangerous type of website. The amount of time you spend, so if it's a short time, then it's probably less worrisome. If it's all day, it might be more of an issue. And the activities that they're doing. Are they bullying kids? Are they making friends? Are they joining a support group? That kind of stuff is going to have a big difference, what it is they're actually doing. So that will bring us to the end then of Chapter 7 material. So, yay, awesome.